let's do this. I'm excited about today. We're talking about testing Quarterhorse. I know all of us have been on the podcast before, so we can just do some quick names and titles, and then we can just launch right into it. Cool. Danielle, you want to start us off?
Yeah. I'm Danielle Mittrack. I'm the director of Quarterhorse Engineering. And yeah, I've been with Hermeus for about 2 years. Really excited to be leading the Quarterhorse program and getting Mick and Michelle an airplane to fly. We can't wait. Yeah.
Sweet. Michelle, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Michelle Turlick, a flight test engineer.
That was quick. Mick Mansfield, Director of Flight Test Engineering, and we can't wait to get an airplane.
Oh, yeah. And I'm Anthony. I am leading up the avionics development and test team here at Hermeus. So I'm super excited about this episode of the podcast because we're going to be talking about testing Quarterhorse, both leading up to flight and then also through the flight test program itself. So I really want to start off with Michelle and Mick talking about, hey, like, what is flight test? What is the flight test org? What do you do here at Hermeus? What would you say you do here at Hermeus? Let's start there just to baseline what flight test is and what it means here at Hermeus.
Okay, you want to take this or shall I?
Either way.
I'll take it away. Okay, so flight test essentially proves the vehicle in the air. I think it was Wilbur Wright or somebody back in the early days said,
First flight test
engineers. You can prove a lot on the ground, but if you really want to feel what a vehicle does, you got to take it into flight. Mm-hmm. And all of the great stuff that gets done during design, the build, the design, the CAD, all of that kind of stuff comes to a point when we get to flight test, and we go up, we push it into flight test, we make sure that all that CAD, all that stuff works, and we test the limits. So we basically take the airplane to its limit and make sure that it's behaving as it should do. Oh, yeah. And we get a great product.
Yeah.
So a misconception that people might have is, hey, you have all these engineers who are building this plane. Like, why aren't they testing it? Like, why do you have this separate flight test organization? What
Mm-hmm.
is the skill set and expertise that you guys bring to the table that the engineers might not necessarily have?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a complete discipline approach. So really the flight test discipline itself, it's the entire spectrum of planning, conducting test, analyzing test data, and then reporting on the results. Mm-hmm. And so such that it's a meaningful decision making
mm-hmm.
tool. And going through the whole process, it's a very specialized approach, just because airplanes are very specialized things. Airplanes a system of systems and an aerodynamic eggshell. Mm-hmm. And having the understanding all the nuances, all the depth, all the complexities of that system of systems, mm-hmm. how it can react in a very complex environment is really a specialty of test, and it's a specialty of engineering. Really, flight test engineering at its core is a risk management philosophy. So throughout the whole process, you're looking at what level of risk do we have, what level of risk are we willing to accept, and how can we leverage our engineering, design, analysis tools, all that, everything we have at our disposal to maybe design out some of those risks or identify the ones that we need to accept and take forward. And when we know those consciously, and we can make an informed decision on here's how we'll manage it in terms of procedures, in terms of design, in terms of flight test approach, and plan it and go.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's design, risk management, and execution.
You mentioned something that I really like, which is hey, figuring out what your risk posture is and then being able to rely on the engineering tools and to be able to really quantify that decision-making process mm-hmm. as well. So I know that you guys work a lot with the engineering team as well. Danielle, do you mind talking a little bit about what flight test looks like in terms of how the engineering org uses a lot of the guidance that they provide to just iterate quickly on even things from design to planning and things on that front too?
Yeah, so the engineering team, especially here, the approach that Hermeus is taking is much closer to kind of the new space approach to aviation. So it's really important that we have the flight test team involved in all of our design reviews very early. Pre-design review while we're trying to design what the system does. We need to have an understanding of what inherent risk we're building into the system so that they're informed and are bought into that risk posture before we're trying to fly. And they're like, no, we can't have this type of system operating on the aircraft. So I'm in meetings with Mick and Michelle, are in engineering meetings daily, and
constantly
providing input to how the aircraft's going to respond in flight, what sort of problems we're going to face operating on a range, operating the aircraft generally, and informing what Hermeus has, which is a lot. We have a lot of aerospace engineers, and people that have operated and designed airplanes before, but we have a lot of rocket engineers too, and getting them up to speed on all of the aviation specific pieces that they haven't thought about since college at times.
Oh yeah. Are there specific examples of things that you immediately jump to and say like, hey, based off of all of these experiences in the flight test world, and then coming to Hermeus, which is a mix of lots of different engineers from lots of different backgrounds. Were there specific things that Nick, you, Michelle, or even Danielle came into and say like, oh, here's a new way that maybe Hermeus isn't thinking about yet that was immediately obvious to you with your flight test background?
And I think it's great. What Danielle brings up is there are a lot of aerospace engineers here that have spent a lot of time at New Space, and then of course it's sort of just the way you think about things occasionally. The biggest one that I always got when we were very early on in the design process was, and I can't remember which one of the propulsion team it was, but they basically said, you want to throttle the engine? And it's like, yeah, because we don't just keep it going all the time. We're not trying to get out of the atmosphere. We kind of try to, we want to drive around in it. And so those little different approaches like that kind of make, little nuances that maybe some of the design team aren't thinking about because they come from that background that we do think about. So, throttling the engine, moving stuff around, that's the other part, yeah.
Another big part, Danielle, you alluded to it with working on the range, is a lot of the external work that y'all do as well. Everything from, working with RSO, the range safety folks, and really even people outside of Hermeus itself. Do you mind talking about the bodies that y'all interact with outside of Hermeus too?
Sure.
Yes.
I'll take the regulatory, Michelle, and you can take the operational. How's that sound? So we're obviously putting the vehicle up into the National Airspace System. We have to cooperate with everything that already exists within that system. So a lot of my work at my level is dealing with the regulatory authorities, the FAA, the other regulatory authorities that feed the FAA, so SAE, Society of Flight Test Engineers, Society of Experimental Test Pilots, so that we feed the industry to get to us to this new space where we're going, because we are building a Mach 5 vehicle, and one of the things that Mach 5 vehicles do is they eat up a lot of ground very quickly. Nobody's really prepared for that yet in the aerospace world. In the rocket world, sure, people are used to things going Mach 5. Airplanes, not so much. We are breaking ground every day, and that's what makes my job really interesting. From an operational perspective, Michelle?
Yeah, operational perspective, it's working with the range, working with RSO, working with the folks we're going to be interacting with.
What is an RSO?
Range Safety Officer. Yes.
I
know. We love our acronyms.
We love acronyms. Yes. I'm going to try to call them out as we say them, but I probably will
do
forget.
it. Yes, keep us honest. Yeah. We'll keep you honest. Yeah, always. So working with the range, working with the control room, figuring out how are we going to architect to operate. So it's not just a question of global FAA. It's a question of what airspace are we operating in locally? Who owns it? Can we get the frequencies? Can we make sure that we have those? And we have our range times. We have the plans on where we can fly, where we can't fly, and sometimes to a very specific level of detail that we can then develop our flight plans and go from there.
Yeah, Michelle, I'm glad you work with the RSOs, just because I've went through RCC 319, which is a Spectra flight termination systems,
Yes.
and I'm like, oh man, I'm not jealous of the people who have to interact with these folks day in and day out.
Yeah, but really it's communicating. As Danielle said, what is our system? What is our risk posture on that system? And a lot of things we're doing are relatively unconventional in the aerospace industry, and being able to communicate that, get the external buy-in, where we're going to operate, who we're going to be operating with, and have them on the same page in terms of our goals, our objectives, and our risk posture is very, very important. And that's coordination that happens months and years before you go and get your first flight.
Oh yeah, I think that you mentioned that the things we're trying to do here are pretty unconventional, which I think is immediately obvious as soon as you start getting into our program and things are weird, and the FAA doesn't really know how to handle a plane like ours. Something I found is we find ourselves at this weird Venn diagram intersection where, hey, we don't have the operational complexity of, say, a rocket. We don't have cryogenics or anything like that. So we have some flexibility to iterate a lot, crawl, walk, run into some of our testing. But on the other side, you also don't have a pilot on this platform. So you can actually put a little bit more risk into that flight test program as well. So you kind of have this pretty wide trade space in terms of test philosophy or even like how you actually want to test this vehicle. Danielle, do you mind taking a second and just saying like what makes Quarterhorse a weird airplane to think about, both on the engineering side, but even when we are out here testing this vehicle? Like what makes Quarterhorse unique? What makes it the same? And then I would love it if Michelle, you and Mick talked about the flight test vantage point of what makes Quarterhorse unique and what makes Quarterhorse the same as other flight test programs you guys have worked on before.
Yeah. So from the engineering perspective, it's the breadth of range that Quarterhorse operates in. Because we go from takeoff to Mach 5 to landing, that's the difference. And engineering wise, like speaking, specifically engineering wise, and a little outside of the test environment, it's an entirely transient problem. We have no steady state operation in our mission. I'm gonna use a flight test word, in our flight envelope and not in our trajectory.
Oh, hey.
Well done.
You trained me well. Flight envelope.
This is how we gel as a team. Yes.
Yeah.
We talk about the same things.
Slowly hive mind.
Yeah.
So
it's working.
Yeah. I mean, it is a flight envelope. It is an airplane that when we're really trying to like hit this thing up to Mach 5, it's gonna follow a pre-planned flight profile, which I would say is likely like a trajectory. But we do have a flight envelope that the thing operates in. So the transient nature of the problem allows us to flex in certain ways, and it's also like an aircraft that is very highly integrated. The length of the root of our wing is a third at least of the length of the fuselage. We don't have as many clear structural interfaces where you can have a entirely separate group operating on something, and our teams have to work really closely together to get an airplane like Quarterhorse in the air.
Yeah. And I also kind of want to ask you to flex a little bit of some of your background testing some stuff at previous places you worked on, and say like, hey, what are some of the challenges that you expect to be similar when we start getting into some of the subsystem testing here at Quarterhorse, and what you anticipate on being different too? Yeah.
So, I mean, testing an aircraft engine is a little easier in some ways and harder in others. So I worked at Astra, which is a small launch provider out of the Bay Area of California, and we did a lot of like stage. I was working on the upper stage system, did a lot of stage testing, which involved engine testing there. And you're behind a big concrete wall, so if something like the stored energy of the system is higher, so it's less safe in some ways, but you have big walls. And I remember interviewing at Hermeus, we had the seed round engine, the shipping container that's behind us, out at PDK still operational, and we were just like standing off to the side behind
just
this,
a couple feet
just
back.
like a safe distance, but like enough that you can feel the vibration of even that little engine, and then the afterburner kicks in. And Glenn remembers seeing me jump because I am I'm a jumpy person, and so that like loud like pop when the AB kicks on, like it's different, but you can like be closer to it. You can kind of see into it, which is like without cameras, which is a little different. But in terms of testing Quarterhorse and what'll be maybe easier, maybe harder, slightly lower pressure systems, so we can do more things a little closer. And we're being very iterative. So we should be able to get validation on smaller systems as we go. We're building out a full fluid system test bed, a pseudo Ironbird, to be able to do a lot of that testing as we go. That'll do a lot of avionics testing and fluid systems testing. So the system, when it gets put onto the aircraft, should be largely validated. A lot of that happens in other organizations as well, or other places I've been, but maybe not as completely. So it's a little bit of that.
Sweet. Michelle, I want to ask you the same question in terms of what makes Quarterhorse unique, what makes Quarterhorse not unique, and then talk a little bit about your previous test background and what you anticipate bringing to the Hermeus team, and maybe what's going to be different about testing Quarterhorse.
Yeah. So Quarterhorse, it's a very ambitious program in terms of the flight test buildup. Where I say we're a bit more aggressive than most platforms that I've previously worked on, which is to be expected. This is entirely research and development type vehicle, whereas some of those were more certification type projects. So the level of system maturity, fidelity, and also the entire goal of the flight test program differs quite a bit. But the fundamental flight test process is the same. You're going to go and you're going to identify your risks. You're going to go do your planning. You're going to try to manage and mitigate those risks to an acceptable level and go and make an informed decision to test. So in that respect, going and executing a flight test program, you follow that process. And the process is what it is for a reason. You've got 120 years of flight test experience back from the Wrights, becoming the first aerospace engineers, the first test pilots, and the first flight test engineers, and all the amazing things that they accomplished. But setting out that disciplined approach and following that disciplined approach, really you can apply it very easily between one aircraft to another. Just a question of aggressiveness and risk posture.
Oh yeah, and related question there is, in terms of what we really want to be getting out of Quarterhorse, it's not necessarily like a fighter where, we were anticipating a pilot doing, a slew of different testing, an aircraft that we have to maintain for extended periods of time. Really, it's a vehicle with a pretty small lifespan. How does that affect how we think about flight tests, whether it's coming up with test cars or test points? How does that change the approach for testing Quarterhorse, specifically getting into flight test?
I think I can take this on, and this one kind of goes all the way back to the conversations that Danielle and I have right from the get-go. Normally, you'd certify an airplane, if we were going to take this into commercial service, and we will take Halcyon into commercial service. So this is something we have to think forward to for 20,000 cycles and 20 years worth of life safely. With Quarterhorse, we can iterate quickly, we can move it, and we know that the primary purpose of Quarterhorse is basically to wrap an airframe around the engine, our TBCC engine, and get that into flight as fast as possible. The other thing we don't have to worry about too much is putting a pilot into the airplane. The other part of the flight test brethren are the test pilots, our meat servos. And what we don't have to worry about is putting that meat servo into the
controversial
flight.
term.
Yeah, controversial term. Into the flight deck. So we can move a lot quicker, we can iterate, and we really don't have to make Quarterhorse last for a long time. So we can design it to lower minimums. It doesn't have to last for as long, and we can move quick. We can move really quickly. And interestingly, one of the things for me, Danielle, thank you. You set them up. I'll knock them down. You mentioned the flight envelope. We have a flight envelope. I think this is the first flight test program where I've ever actually pushed the airplane right to the edge of its flight envelope deliberately, because we don't have a flight test pilot on board. We don't have a crew on board. We know the airplane's not designed to last for a million years, so we're okay with that. And we can push the vehicle very quickly to a limit. And if it goes into the desert, and again, this is why we work with the 412 and the other test wings. If we push it into the desert, hey, no harm, no foul.
Yeah. I've definitely noticed at Hermes we have a lot of different levels of the crawl, walk, run, whether it's Quarterhorse, Dark Horse, Halcyon, and then even within Quarterhorse, the different tails. So even Tail 1 intentionally is not going to be a hypersonic vehicle.
Right.
Do you mind talking about why we decided to make that decision and talk a little bit more about what the scope of Tail 1 actually is for us?
Yeah, I'll take that one to start, and then you guys can jump in. The fundamental thing is that we have to build an airplane, a hypersonic airplane that also can be operated at low speeds. So we have to get really good at takeoff and landing. We have to get really good at working with the range and operating the vehicle in the lower speed regime. Like we'll be there a lot, so we have to be able to do it. And then we can start getting some data on our aircraft reaching Mach 1, reaching transonic, as long as we don't lawn dart it before then. And even if we did lawn dart it at before we hit Mach 1, I don't like the Mark 1 vehicle, the tail one, the first aircraft we build will still be successful if we can get it off the ground.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, the faster that we can get real data in real world operational conditions, it's worth for 20 million hours of simulation and modeling.
Oh yeah.
You know, one flight test, one hour flight test will give you that. Is that's the end all be all. That's truth.
Yeah, I do want to talk more about all the subsystem testing that we're doing leading up to that first flight. But I think that Hermeus does not shy away from being able to iterate off of new data. I mean, even take the state of the company video that we had at the end of last year. Like Quarterhorse today looks very different than it did a year ago, and I think that comes from being willing to go out and hey, we're not going to just stick to that sunk cost fallacy.
Right.
Given this new data, given this new information, we're willing to actually iterate and use that to make a better plane, which I think is very exciting. So let's talk about some of the upcoming tests that we have leading up to the actual vehicle integration and eventually flying Quarterhorse. So I know that all of you are very involved in all of them. So I guess we can just kind of list them through and talk a little bit about what it is, what value we get out of it, and maybe describe it a little bit for folks who aren't familiar with what that test is. So Danielle, you mentioned the Iron Bird. So what is an Iron Bird? What value do you actually get out of it? What teams use it? Let's start there.
So an Iron Bird can be like the first image I have is I had an internship at one point and saw like a big steel full steel airframe with representative control surfaces. Inertia representative control surfaces that operate and move systems and run mission simulations. So put a flight profile in and move the thing, or have a pilot operating or an operator operating and test control surfaces and the hydraulic system, making sure that the system can keep up with all of the inputs that the pilot is gonna put into it. It's also using the flight-like electronics, and so all of the avionics systems are integrated. Try to keep it as representative of the vehicle as possible, so that anything that you find there, you can design out of occurring on the aircraft, and anything you like. And if you made changes later, you don't want to be finding a line length, a pressure drop down the length of a longer line on the aircraft the first time you want to find that on the Iron Bird. So fluid systems team uses it, the avionics team use it, the flight test team will certainly be very interested in data coming out of that as well.
Oh yeah. You mentioned the avionics, like all the GNC sim work that goes into that is I've noticed is like one flavor of avionics, and then there's the whole network stack telemetry, which actually brings us to Michelle, what you spent a lot of time doing on some of the surrogate flight testing work as well. So what is surrogate flight testing for the folks who don't know? Yeah. And I feel like we've talked a lot about this, and it's actually pretty exciting. Do you want to explain that one?
Yeah, surrogate testing is very exciting. So what surrogate testing is you're taking a piece of your avionics hardware or other piece of hardware, whatever you want, but you're hosting it on another aircraft platform. So we're developing things right now for Quarterhorse that'll fly on Quarterhorse, but before Quarterhorse is ready to fly, we want to get information on how our navigation system works in flight, how our telemetry link works in flight. All these things that can inform our design decisions right now and our architecture decisions right now, and can de-risk aspects of the things we find for the first time on first flight of Quarterhorse. We can spread those out over a span of months. So okay, we're going to learn this about this subsystem, that subsystem, and how we integrate all of them together in that complex aircraft, in that complex flight environment. So limit the number of unknowns that we take on first flight of Tail 1.
Yeah,
and all in that, it's a very exciting work, because you can tell how excited I am just talking about it. But it's our first real hardware getting into the air, and it's a significant milestone for the program, for the company. Just even there, it's that's where we become an avionics company. We have avionics hardware in flight, and there you go. And also using that as the opportunity to start bringing up and training the team in flight test operations and real-time telemetry, and building our entire capability and knowledge base in our team to prepare for
flight test program.
For the whole flight test program.
One
so
piece,
exciting.
Yeah, one piece that I'll add there is it's not just the avionics that's on the ground, in the air. It's also the avionic system, the flight deck.
The flight deck too. Yes.
Everything that's on the ground side, which as an remotely piloted system, we have a system in a piece of our system in the air and a piece of our system on like our flight decks on the ground, and so we have to verify all of the communications that we have between the aircraft and the in the air and the ground system, and we can do that before we have a Quarterhorse in the air.
Yeah. So we're testing part of the Quarterhorse system before the Quarterhorse aircraft part of the Quarterhorse system is ready to fly. So that's it's huge, absolutely huge.
And I think, as Michelle said earlier on, the aircraft is a system of systems wrapped in a thin aerodynamic eggshell.
It's an aerodynamic eggshell.
I should use that one more often. So we're already an engine company. We've designed the engine, we've built the engine, we've operated the engine. We know it works, and it works beautifully. Now we're going to become an avionics company, and we're going to test out all of that command and control, telemetry, and everything else. And then, again, crawl, walk, run fashion. Then we become an aircraft company where we integrate all of those systems of systems into each other, and it goes to fly. And that's just fantastic.
Oh, yeah. On the becoming an aircraft company, there's a bunch of testing we're doing on that front, too.
Sure.
Ranging from, landing gear drop testing to ground vibration testing. Do you mind, Danielle, with the structures background, you might be the person most apt to talk about this stuff. What are those testings? What do you learn from it? And how does it inform Quarterhorse design?
Yes, there's a lot of them. The landing gear system testing, it's is like a system that's highly coupled between the structures team and our fluid systems team that's actuating that system. So there are deployment tests, there's actuator tests on that, there's drop testing to identify how the landing gear system responds as you're coming down in landing. I guess that's redundant, but yes, so we'll get information about that. We'll have structural testing of different components. We'll have our first, I guess, the Elevon or aileron test rig is close to having its final integration to get that test off. You mentioned ground vibration testing, GVT. That'll give us responses of the vehicle, and that's really kind of the last test just before we roll out, as well as a full structural ATP. So we'll take acceptance test procedure. So that'll take the aircraft and put load into the wings, stress the aircraft the way that we expect it to be stressed, as close as we expect it to be stressed in flight, to verify that it won't break apart when you take off.
Gotcha. And then there's, of course, hey, we finish all these testing, we roll out. Do we go out and just go as fast as we can? What's the next step?
Absolutely.
That's
it. Send it.
Send it.
No, so once we get all that done, as Daniel said, GVT is probably the last one before we roll the airplane out. Then we've still got a whole bunch of end-to-end checks to do. The vehicle is a system of systems. We have to make sure all those systems talk to each other. We have to put them in a realistic environment. So we're going to go through something called end-to-end checks, which is basically when the vehicle gets switched on for the first time and we make sure that the engine starts up, we can shut it down, we can control it, the flight deck works, the ground control station, all of that good stuff. And then we take it into a low-speed taxi where it moves under its own power for the first time. So it's now taxiing with the engine going. We've got to make sure the wheels work, the brakes come on when we expect them to, they don't, all that good stuff at low speed. Then we get into a high-speed taxi scenario. We'll take it almost up to flight speed, to rotation speed, so that we're starting to get aerodynamic effect on the airplane. Maybe not enough to get it off the ground, but certainly enough to put some air under the wings so that we start getting lift and generating information for the flight sciences folks. And then, and only then, if that all looks good and everything comes together, we'll take it out to the range and we'll put it down a runway and we'll make sure that it takes off. And that may take a while. We may do a few more high-speed taxi runs, while we're trying to get it into flight. But eventually, that's all going to lead to the airplane coming off, taking off, and flying around, which is going to be very exciting. And the other thing that does, of course, is it prepares us as a team to go into that flight. It prepares the test pilots, the test engineers, the support engineers, everybody back at the factory. We're always learning. We're going to be pretty hard on brakes. We're going to be pretty hard on the tires. So it just, all those reps that we get in, it helps us. Everything helps.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned just getting everyone trained. I think there's, of course, the logistical side of training. I think there's also probably a culture side of testing as well.
Sure.
Yes.
We all saw how excited Michelle got talking about surrogate flight testing. But I think some of the most fun stories come out of testing. Both whether it's prep for a
Mhm.
test or the test itself.
Mhm.
It's always fun when something crazy happens. It depends. Usually avionics is like, we're glad we got the data system working, and now something crazy happened. Like,
Yeah.
so this is, Danielle, you're
But,
gonna hate
yeah.
me for saying this.
It's your perspective.
My perspective is like, it is actually a little exciting for avionics when we have like a mad dash to the finish line and then something breaks, because it's like, man, like we did it. We burned some midnight oil, and now we learned a thing.
Oh, yeah. I am always happy when we learn the thing too. But it is like
It's always a bittersweet
it's
moment,
always
though.
a little bittersweet.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I love breaking things. It's super fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think like the one that comes to mind is, I think like it was like DeAndre and I, like, this is maybe like a year ago, because of course we had like the whole Notre Dame test campaign, but I think we were just like, everything that could have been broken was broken, but we like have it just in time. It's working, first day of test, and we're testing a plastic inlet, and we learn very quickly that doesn't work, and it's just like testing it like informs iteration, kind of like we were saying before, but it is just like, we were just like, DeAndre and I were just like high-fiving each other. We were just like, oh man, we did it, like we made it, we learned something, and now we're like that much closer to the right solution. I'm sure y'all have a bunch of fun test stories. I want to just kind of give the floor to y'all and see like, what are the fun ones that come to mind that you would like to share here?
I think anytime you're pushing a limit, those can be fun. They're the ones that you prepare for the most. So whenever you're pushing the vehicle beyond its normal envelope that the customer's going to take it to, and you're pushing it to where the regulatory authorities want you to take it to, that's always it concentrates your mind, because we really are taking the vehicle to its limits at that point. No matter how much you plan for those things, there will always be something that just catches your attention. The ones that I always can think of, and Michelle is probably going to go on the same track, are flutter tests, where we're actually deliberately stimulating the vehicle to almost come apart. And flutter for the audience is basically a dynamic condition where the airplane starts to vibrate, and it can go into a resonant mode very quickly, and then essentially you get what's called explosive flutter, and the airplane comes apart, and hopefully the crew eject. So again, when you're doing those tests, you prepare for them very carefully. You prepare for them, almost to the second of what you're doing at any point during that test. But then, of course, something won't be right. And the classic one is we operate in the atmosphere. Well, the atmosphere doesn't like the 1976 US standard atmosphere. It doesn't go down by 2 degrees every 1,000 feet. Sometimes there is an inversion. Sometimes there's a gust. And if you're doing something where you're right on the edge of the envelope already, and you catch an inversion, whoops, we just blew through the envelope. And at that point, it's like, hey, we shouldn't be doing that. So those ones get your attention, but they're the most fun to do. They really are, because you come back down and you go, yeah, I'm alive. It's great.
Yeah, you're really executing at your highest capability, in terms of preparation as a team, cohesiveness, focus, and planning and execution. And there are a lot of exciting flight test stories, but I'd say probably the most rewarding testing is the ones that you do all that planning and preparation for. And unexpected things happen, you handle those as a team, and you come back, and really the best days are the boring days, I would say, because that means that we've properly understood and planned for the potential unknowns, and had our plans for what we would do if we encounter those unknowns, and then executed those and came back and test another day.
Oh yeah, that's exciting stuff. So I think something that both of you mentioned also were just like, getting this team like used to flight test program, which, admittedly this team, especially as a company, we haven't had that experience of doing. And then of course, like, we see these other flight test programs, many of which are very expensive, many of which take a very long time to actually execute the entire flight test program. Right. How do you think about here at Hermeus, in the spirit of being lean, moving quickly, having the purest form of the flight test program, both like, how do we think about things in terms of like what that flight test program needs to look like that might be unconventional? And then of course, like kind of a related question is, coming to Hermeus, especially being a startup, I'm sure that it would be surprising to me if neither of you were nervous about like, oh man, like we're gonna do this as like a new company. What are you personally nervous about, or maybe even worried about? Like, hey, like this is something that like we're super excited for, maybe, but like it's a little nerve wracking in terms of getting into flight test for the first time.
Yeah, always, and there's always that tension in being a flight test professional, of being aware of all the things that can go wrong,
Sure,
and planning for them, managing them, and mitigating them, and then at the end of the day, accepting what you can't plan, manage, or mitigate out. In terms of the startup mentality, there's a lot of aggression. There's a lot of willingness to get to hardware and push and see how far it can go, and the acceptance of breaking things. So I'd say organizationally, it's aggressive, and that's our posture, and that's what we need. That's a differentiator for our team. That's part of what makes our approach so valuable, and how we're driving down times for design, build, test, fly, and then design, build, test, fly again. So in that, it's understanding and accepting that mindset, and furthering that mindset, seeing the value. It's a tool, and we're using the tool appropriately, but that also brings in some other considerations for flight test. We know that going in, we're accepting a higher risk posture, and as we go through, that's something that we document, plan, communicate, and at the end of the day, get everybody's buy-in and go forward, accept it. So part of the part of what's really exciting about the approach is that everything that we're doing is essentially envelope expansion. We are continually pushing the limit, pushing the boundary, pretty much on every flight for Quarterhorse. So in that, it really takes us back to the research and development aircraft in 1950s, 1960s. The X-15 type program, where every single flight they were doing something new and innovative, not only in that configuration, but in terms of airspeed, in terms of sensor packages they're flying on the airplane. Just phenomenal, but very aggressive and for a purpose. And that's something that's not very prevalent in today's aerospace environment, because there hasn't been a purpose or a driving desire or a goal for that. And here, that's part of our objective and part of our approach, and part of what's so exciting about it, because it is that continual balance of what can we achieve and how far can we push, and how can we do it in the most effective, most efficient manner as well.
Something you mentioned, which I really like, is having that startup mentality, which really hasn't existed in a long time in this flight test world. How does that extend outside of Hermeus, though? So when you are working with the ranges, when you are working with regulatory agencies, do they respond well to this startup mentality that we have, or is that difficult, or is that very difficult?
From my perspective, it's very difficult. I think from a regulatory basis, and as Michelle says, since the 50s, we really haven't gone faster. I think as AJ mentioned during the state of the company, since the 1950s, airplanes have not gotten faster. That we've stayed at the same 0.85 Mach for 60 years almost. The Concorde was the only exception to that rule. And Concorde required a lot of regulatory compensation to get it through the regulations. The regulations themselves are well developed, but they were started to be, those regulations that we certify a lot of the airplanes to were started in the 40s. They're 80 years old, and they haven't evolved as fast as the industry's evolved. And they certainly aren't evolving as fast as we are moving. And through no fault of their own, the regulatory bodies cannot keep up with what industry is doing right now. Industry has the capabilities. We see SpaceX, we see Blue Origin, we see those guys. They have the capability to move far faster than the regulatory industry or the regulatory bodies can keep up. So both technologically and regulatory, we are way ahead of what the authorities can cope with, and we're just pushing them even further. That's something that's going to have to change within the aerospace industry. Is these bodies have to be able to keep up with us.
Yeah, Michelle, you mentioned the X-15, and Danielle, earlier you were mentioning us not being shy to, make some holes in the desert because we are an unpiloted platform. I think the example that comes to mind is, going from whether it's tail 1 to tail 2 or tail 3 to tail 2 to tail 3, if we make a hole in the desert, how do we actually recover from that? It's easy for us to say like, all right,
Sure.
here we are, let's try again. But
Yeah.
making sure everyone else is on board, like what actually happens
But I think,
when you crash a vehicle?
Sure, yeah. From that perspective, it depends whether we knew we were going to crash it or whether it was something that was completely unplanned. And we mentioned the flight envelope. We know, in theory, when we've done all the analysis, when we've done all the ground vibration testing, we know where the structural limit of that vehicle is. We can push the vehicle right up to the edge of the structural limit because we don't have a pilot on board. So we can push very, very close to our limits. If for whatever reason we push close to that limit and it comes apart and it ends up in the desert, we can say, yeah, you know what? We knew it was going to do that because we were very close to the limit. So we're within the margin of error. If it comes apart when we're doing slow speed taxiing and one of the wheels falls off, well, that may not be so good. So that's actually a harder thing to recover from than a planned event where we're almost certain that we're going to do some damage. So it again, the way Michelle described it, it's risk posture. It's what we take into the flight test, what risk we assume, and how well we've codified that risk. Again, we can be in flight very quickly after we've had a mishap, as long as we can explain what we've done. So that's again, some of the approach that we have to take as an engineering company is having that track and trace ability to be able to get us to that standard where we can just say, yep, this is what we did, here's the data, and we knew it was probably going to do that.
Yeah. So Danielle, this might be a question for you. In terms of as we go through the build process, as we go through the engineering steps, what are some of the ways that we're tracking here at Hermeus? Like, this is exactly what the state of the plane is. This is what's going on the plane. So then when we're getting into flight and we get some data, bringing that back and really being able to say exactly what went wrong.
Yeah. So we have an ERP system, an engineering resource planning.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
I don't know.
Another acronym.
Another acronym. We have a means of tracking the work that happens on the airplane and the work that happens on really any critical engineering system. So it's something we're developing directly because the tools that exist need modification for what we need it to do anyway. And we're working through that process right now. But it'll track the part number that we get in, the serial number that is associated with it, what serial number ends up on the airplane, any work notes that are associated with that, so that if we see a failure we don't expect specifically, we can track down where it came from and explain why it happened so that we can get back into the air.
And I think on the note of unexpected failures, something that always comes up is safety or even mission assurance, which I know is something that we talk about often at Hermeus. Do you mind drawing the distinction between the two, specifically for the Quarterhorse program? And maybe we can talk a little bit about how Hermeus thinks about safety and making sure as we go through subsystem testing as well as flight test, how do we think about safety here?
Yeah, so there's a big difference between safety and programmatic risk. So carrying something that we'll accept is risk to damage a piece of the engine or damage a piece of the airframe. Take hardware and test it to its limit so we know exactly where it is. What we won't accept is safety risk. So risk to personnel. That's not. That's why we don't have a pilot on board, and not something anybody wants to have happen. Like it happens in engineering, and we absolutely do not want that to happen here. Not that anybody wants it to happen where it has happened in the past. So safety is always front of mind, and we have anytime we have a test, we do a test readiness review and make sure that the safety aspects of that are captured and prevented. Engineering organizations document any near miss you have, so you learn from the things that you got lucky on. We do that here as well. But we try to be forward-looking and engineer out safety risks so that we can put risk into the hardware system so we can learn and learn the right thing. Not spend as much time in analysis paralysis solving problems that aren't actually problems. Do you guys have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much in line with what I'm thinking. Um, we go through all of those processes. We do the validation, the verification of all of the systems and everything else. But what we're also doing by the time we get to flight test is threat error management. So it becomes more of a case of we're starting to manage the safety aspects. I think programmatically what we're doing with the engineering work gets us to a point where we can manage threats a lot better. And because flight test is somewhat more unknown, we can't always predict what's going on. So we try and manage that threat so that we never get to the point where James Reason's Swiss cheese model, we line up all the holes and eventually we have a smoking hole. So we manage those threats as we plan for test and as we get into test. And it's something that all flight test professionals are trained highly in, and we spend a lot of time doing that. Mm-hmm. So that's something as a company that we do, and it's something as a company that we're going to get better at as we go through all of these evolutions of component testing, acceptance testing, qualification testing, etc. So, but with that, we're going to get there.
All right.
It's going to be fun.
I'm excited. This is going to be going.
It's going to be great.
All right. So last segment, I have a list.
Oh, good grief.
I have a list of aviator slang here.
Here we go.
Brought to you by Marty, the man behind the camera. Shout out, Marty. So some of these I didn't know. So I'm curious to see how we do here. All right. First one here is ACM.
Air combat maneuvering.
Oh, man.
Or air cycle machine.
Okay. So I want you to say what it is and also like what it also is. Like, do you mind giving a definition for the folks who don't know?
Sure. Yeah, air combat maneuvering is basically what you see them doing in Top Gun. It's fighter maneuvering, and essentially that's what air combat maneuvering is. It's you can't just say, hey, we're going to go and have a dogfight. You have to give it a 3-letter acronym. So ACM is what we do.
Nice. All right, next one, AOA.
Angle of attack.
Angle of attack.
All right, what is that?
That's your wing's angle of incidence with regards to the oncoming air.
That was the textbook answer. Nice.
Hmm?
All right, next we have BAT decoder.
Oh, that's a Navy one. That's BAT decoder is, let me get this. Oh, good grief, this is a long time ago. Isn't that the book you have to decode the signals from the AWACS or one of those?
Yeah.
The joint or one of those?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah, a sheet of paper carried on all flight operations that is the key to current airborne communication codes.
There we go.
Nice. Next, we got blower.
It's reheat.
Yeah,
or afterburner.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Afterburner.
Let's see. Okay.
Reheat.
Bravo Zulu.
Well done.
Man, Mick, you're just dunking here, man. Let's see. Cherubs.
Nope. You've lost me on that one.
Altitude in hundreds of feet.
Yeah.
Did you know this one?
Cherubs?
Cherub
Distance,
3 is
AGL.
300 feet?
Yeah.
Did you know this one?
Yeah.
Oh, I had never heard of that one.
Yeah, that one's weird.
Yeah?
Angels I've heard of, cherubs
Yeah,
I haven't.
it's like they're like tiny angels.
Tiny angels.
Tiny
yeah.
angels. And
Uh-huh.
Is an angel a different unit
Angels
of measurement?
1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Cherub is a little baby angel. So.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Let's see. Deadhead.
That's when you take a flight from some place to another place and you're not actually doing any flying.
Yeah. Pilot flying as a passenger.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Go fasters.
No,
I don't know this one.
I didn't know that one.
Running shoes.
Okay.
How is that?
Is that an aviation
Aviation
term?
Maybe. It's just like,
Marty?
I gotta grab my go fasters. It's like, shoes, really?
Nah.
All right. Go juice.
Jet A.
Yeah. Jet fuel or coffee.
I was going to say coffee.
Yeah.
but
You shouldn't get those too mixed.
Are you feeling the airplane or are you
Or
feeling
maybe you
the
should.
human?
I guess either. It could be both.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone loves the smell of jet fuel in the morning, right?
Right?
Yes.
It's the smell of
I
freedom.
think there's only one person who actually does, and it's Glenn. Like, there was a while where Glenn was looking at Jet A scented candles on Etsy,
Nice.
and
We got to be testing more. If
I know.
Glen's- Yeah.
I think this was before we were finding the engine.
We can just make our own.
We could very easily.
Yeah.
I was a little terrified because Jet A smells atrocious.
It's amazing.
You got to love it.
I've slowly been. We're getting.
We'll get you there.
Baby steps.
Don't worry.
All right. Next, we got Goat Locker.
No.
Yeah.
Lost
All the
me.
high ups hang out.
I was going to say, I was going to say something about greatest of all time, but
Maybe. Huh.
Yeah.
All right, next one, HOTAS.
Hands on throttle and stick.
Yeah. What is a HOTAS? What is that?
That's your stick and throttle. So it's got buttons on it as well. In addition to being controlling your attitude and your thrust, you also have buttons for the radio and other functions you may want to use in flight. So weapons, etc.
Nice.
And now we have, of course, VTAS, voice throttle and stick.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next we have poopy suit.
Ah, yes.
Dry suit, immersion suit.
Yeah. Oh, I also did not know that. Is that a specific context-based thing where you'd wear a poopy suit?
It's a survival gear.
Okay,
So yeah,
gotcha.
you're cold water. You don't want to get hypothermia
Okay.
immediately.
Yeah.
You'll get it eventually.
Nice.
Used to use them in the UK a lot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The tracks.
All right. Next we have nugget.
That's the newest guy on the carrier.
Yeah.
Or
I was
newest pilot.
immediately thinking about like chicken McNuggets. We are not the same. All right. 3 more. Okay, here we go. Sierra Hotel.
Shit hot.
Yeah. What is that? When would a pilot say shit hot?
Oh, when they're having fun. Or
Hey.
they did a really good job. They were shit hot.
Nice.
Or they're just shit hot. I mean, when
All
when,
pilots are shit hot.
when are pilots not shit
When
hot?
they're
That's the
not shit hot,
question.
yeah, exactly. They're always shit hot.
They're always shit hot.
Especially test pilots.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Nice.
That is their way of being.
Sweet. Next we have Winchester.
Yeah, no,
Mm-mm.
lost that one.
Out of weapons.
Well, that's a bad place to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not where you want to be.
Don't want to be Winchester. Let's see. Next we have Zoom bag.
No,
Flight suit.
really?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. We usually call that a grow bag, or I do at least.
A grow bag.
A grow bag, yeah. It's green and it's full of shit. It's,
Oh.
yeah.
Okay. Pilots have weird names for things. It's like someone really made something up once and it's like, that's great. Use that forever.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like it's a small enough community that
It is.
that
Yeah,
it make
pretty
everything everyone has the same inside joke.
Yeah.
Probably.
I
Yeah.
feel like all
exactly.
test pilots know each other. You share like one
Um,
group me or something.
I think it's a pretty,
Pretty
small
close.
community.
Yeah.
I actually I looked at a post from Empire Test Pilot School last week. They just graduated their last class from last year. And in the 75 years that Empire Test Pilot School has been going, they've only ever graduated 1,500 people.
Ever.
And there are 6 test pilot schools in the world.
Uh-huh.
Not all of those schools have been going for 75 years. So yeah,
You can do the math.
It's a very
Yeah.
small
Mhm.
community.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, that's all the fun facts I had for today. Just want to say thanks for everyone's time. This has been such a lovely episode of the podcast.
It's
This
been
is fun.
Good stuff.